creature, terrified, fled to the rooftop and desperately shut the steel door behind him as something horrifying was relentlessly pursuing him. Seeing that the steel door could barely hold, the desperate preacher had no choice but to keep running. Spotting a construction basket hanging on the exterior wall below, he didn't hesitate to jump down. Preacher barely managed to stabilize himself, but when he turned his head, he found a humanoid monster staring intently at him. The shock caused Preacher to lose his grip and fall to his death. Even though Preacher was now a corpse, the monster still wouldn't let him go, as its objective was to prey on humans. Shockingly, this terrifying creature was a human creation. 3 years prior, a dreadful virus swept through New York, carried by cockroaches and rapidly spreading in the densely populated city. Children with weak immune systems were the most affected. Once infected, survival was nearly impossible. Those lucky enough to survive often suffered lifelong disabilities. To this day, there is no cure or vaccine. Fortunately, before the virus could spread further, Susan, a doctor of entomology, through relentless efforts, managed to create a new species using the DNA of termites and cockroaches called the Judas breed. This organism could secrete a special toxin that, while attracting cockroaches, also killed them completely. Soon, with the demise of the virus carriers, the dreadful virus was effectively controlled. Susan and her husband, Peter, became heroes of the city. However, 3 years later, another, more terrifying disaster quietly occurred in the city. The disappearance of Preacher soon caught the attention of the police. In the basement of the church, Chief Josh found some strange clues: a lump of unidentifiable creature feces stuck to the ceiling. Even Peter, a biologist, had never heard of such a thing, but that wasn't the most absurd part. Even more bizarrely, the substance also contained a button. Their investigation was thus at a deadlock. Meanwhile, Susan discovered something terrifying: a giant insect resembling a cockroach. This previously unseen species was sold to her by 2 children. Though it was still a larva, it exhibited extreme aggressiveness. What concerned Susan the most was the secretion inside its body. Because its DNA matched exactly with the Judas breed she created 3 years ago. Could it be an evolved product of the Judas breed? However, this was impossible. To prevent the Judas breed from becoming a disaster, Susan had altered their genes at creation, limiting their lifespan to just 6 months and rendering them unable to reproduce. The Judas breed should have already gone extinct, much less evolved. But as Susan pondered in confusion, she was unaware that a humanoid figure had silently entered the lab. Suddenly, the lights went out. By the time Susan realized what was happening, the Judas breed on the table had already disappeared. Upon arriving home, Susan immediately informed her husband of the situation. Peter was also shocked upon hearing it. To uncover the truth, they found the 2 children who had originally sold them the Judas breed at the subway station and showed them a photo to ask if they had seen the insect eggs in it. But the children hadn't seen any eggs. Instead, they led them to the room where the insects were found. Susan and Peter entered the room, which had a heady smell and seemed to have been abandoned for a long time. Despite their search, they found no clues or traces of the Judas breed. It wasn't until Susan accidentally knocked a bracelet off a shelf that they discovered a hidden passage beneath it. To test the depth below, Susan picked up a bead from the floor and threw it down, while Peter leaned over with a flashlight to peer inside. Unbeknownst to them, danger was already close at hand. Just then, Peter's flashlight accidentally fell down. He desperately reached for it, but to no avail. Susan, being smaller, decided to try herself but was just a bit short of reaching the flashlight, unaware that she was also a step away from death. At the critical moment, Leonard burst through the door. Since they had entered the room without a permit, Leonard kicked them out. Meanwhile, the 2 children who had benefited returned to the subway tunnels. They believed that finding the insect eggs from the photo would surely fetch them more money. Little did they know this would be a deadly journey of no return. They reached a deeper storage room where Ricky accidentally stepped into a disgusting pool of slime. Following the trail of the slime, they looked up to find an object resembling an insect egg shockingly appearing before them. They moved aside some debris to see it was exactly like the one in the photo. Ricky excitedly pulled out a small knife and gently tapped it, clearly hearing the sound of insects wriggling inside. It looked like it could be worth a lot of money, but just as Ricky was about to dig out the egg with his knife, a sudden noise erupted from nearby. They got up and saw a strange humanoid figure in front of them holding a recently dead stray dog in its arms. Their faces turned ashen with fear. As Ricky backed away, he was unwittingly entangled in some wire on the ground. Their fate was predictable.
Help me!
The day after the two children met their demise, a startling discovery was made at a sewage treatment plant. A filter was suddenly clogged by something, and when workers cleared it, they pulled out the body of an unidentified creature. Susan quickly arrived at the scene with her best friend after receiving the news. The workers said they often found strange things here, but this was the first time they encountered such a creature. It looked like a lobster but was distinctly different. Even the well-informed Susan had never seen such a creature. She wanted to call Peter to tell him about it, but he had just obtained a permit and was already in the subway tunnels with Chief Josh and Leonard, investigating. Due to poor signal, they could barely hear each other. After hanging up, the three men continued deeper inside. Susan had no choice but to ask her best friend to take the body to a more professional lab for analysis while she waited at the subway station for Peter and the others to emerge. The laboratory soon had results. Although the body was badly damaged, its internal organs were intact, and its sharp claws indicated it was highly aggressive. This creature was clearly not a genetic mutation but a highly evolved apex predator, leading the scientists to speculate that there might be more than one. At this time, Peter and his companions continued deeper, unaware of the danger they were in. Suddenly, a foul stench overtook them, and Leonard looked up to see the ceiling covered in feces. The sheer amount suggested that this creature was not only complex but also likely numerous. Unfortunately, other than the feces, they found no other valuable clues. Just as Peter was about to head back, a Judas breed suddenly appeared next to Leonard. They finally found a Judas breed only for Leonard to crush it underfoot. However, the situation did not end there. Though they were unharmed, they found themselves trapped below. Leonard had no choice but to tell Josh to hurry out and bring back help, while the two of them waited for rescue, eager to help. Josh didn't think much before setting off, but as he walked, he realized something was wrong. The tunnel system was extensive, and without Leonard to guide him, he found himself lost. Then he came across a metal door and thought it might be an exit, but when he opened it, he found it full of insect eggs. Where there were eggs, there was danger, and sure enough, the next second he heard a strange noise behind him. Although he couldn't see clearly what was behind the water curtain, he sensed danger and quickly left the area. Finally, after passing through a steel door, Josh found an upward exit. Using the debris around him as a footing, Josh successfully pushed open the grate above the shaft, but climbing up was no easy task. Seeing some electrical wires on the ground, he desperately grabbed them, but he slipped and fell back down. The noise immediately attracted the attention of the monsters. Hearing the roar, Josh knew he was in trouble and used all his strength to leap and grab the edge of the shaft. But he had just grabbed the wire and the horrible monster was coming at him at the same time. Meanwhile, Susan, still waiting at the subway station for the three men to emerge, was closely examining the photo of the unidentified creature's body. When she pieced together two photos, she shockingly formed a terrifying human face. Suddenly, a subway train entered the station, startling the focused Susan. However, when she came to her senses, she realized the station was completely deserted. Just then, a strange shadow appeared on the wall across from her. Bracing herself, Susan slowly approached to see the face of the other party, but once she got closer, she realized something was wrong. When she turned to run, it was already too late. When Susan woke from unconsciousness, she found herself in the monster's dining area, with another creature dining nearby. The ground was littered with human belongings and numerous bodies gnawed by the monsters. Susan casually pulled out an iron bar to defend herself, and then she tiptoed along the lighted area. Despite her extreme fear, Susan had no choice but to take risks to survive. Finally reaching the source of the light, Susan looked up to see a large vertical shaft with numerous hurried passers-by above. No matter how desperately Susan screamed for help, the noisy environment drew no attention but unfortunately startled a nearby monster. Hearing the growl, Susan immediately became alert, raising her iron rod, ready to strike. When the monster suddenly appeared, Susan decisively thrust the iron rod with all her might, surprisingly injuring the creature. Susan took the opportunity to flee, and although she tripped up ahead, she was lucky to find a manhole cover. Just as she hid in the sewer, the monster followed her down. Susan narrowly escaped death once more, watching as the monster left, finally allowing her to breathe a sigh of relief. But in the pitch darkness, the desperate Susan dared not make any rash moves and could only sit quietly in place, waiting. After an unknown amount of time, there was suddenly noise outside. Susan slowly looked up to see someone had lit a lighter, and upon closer inspection, it was a familiar face. It turned out to be Manny, a cobbler, who often set up his stall at the nearby subway station with his simple-minded son, Chewy. But today, Chewy had gotten separated from him, and Manny, suspecting Chewy had wandered into the subway tunnels, had stumbled upon this place by mistake. But it was not easy for Manny alone to attempt a rescue. While searching for tools, Manny unexpectedly encountered Peter and Leonard, who were also waiting for rescue. After learning the situation from Manny, they quickly came to the scene, but Peter never expected the woman Manny was talking about would be his own wife. But just as they were about to belt Susan out, Leonard accidentally kicked a glow stick down. The noise successfully attracted a monster. At the critical moment, Peter managed to grab Susan's hand and pull her up. They immediately started running. Peter did not forget to close the manhole cover behind them, but unexpectedly, the monster burst through it in an instant. Faced with the relentless pursuit of the monster, the group had no choice but to hide in an abandoned subway car. But just as they were closing the door, the monster lunged at them. Peter held the car door tightly, not daring to let go. Leonard, the only one with a weapon, fought back fiercely. The pained monster struggled violently, splitting its body in two. But even with half its body falling into the car, it did not die and quickly hid under a shelf. Everyone was tense and terrified by this horrific creature. To ensure the monster was dead, Leonard and Peter cautiously approached to check. After clearing the debris outside, they found the monster motionless. Once Peter confirmed multiple times that the monster was dead, Leonard finally put down his weapon in sight in relief. But the next second, the monster suddenly attacked Leonard with its claws. The pained Leonard emptied his magazine and finally killed the monster for good. After hastily treating Leonard's wounds, they began to study the terrifying monster. Turning the monster's body over, Susan discovered it had evolved lungs, an organ completely absent in insects. The same secretion was enough to prove that the monster was indeed the Judas breed they had created 3 years ago. It was unbelievable that it had evolved so quickly in just 3 years. The reason it had not been discovered sooner was that they could mimic human appearances. Susan pieced together 2 of its claws to form a complete human face. The monster had been using this method to hide among people and prey on humans. Learning that the monster was a creation of Susan and Peter, Leonard and Manny were furious, blaming them for the catastrophe. Loud arguments filled the entire subway car, successfully attracting more monsters. The monsters surrounded the car and attacked with their powerful claws, causing the entire subway car to shake uncontrollably. It was then that Susan realized it might be Leonard's blood that was making the monsters so aggressive. Suddenly, she had an idea. She immediately took the viscera from the monster's body and smeared the secretion on Leonard's wounds. The others quickly acted, spreading the viscera evenly on the subway car windows. Unexpectedly, moments later, the monsters outside stopped attacking and left the area. But staying hidden in the subway car was not a solution. Leonard, by examining the tunnel's blueprint, discovered that this abandoned line could lead directly outside. If they could somehow get the subway running, they could escape directly by train. Leonard noted that although the subway had been abandoned for a long time, it would start up normally once power was restored. After a discussion, they decided to split up, with Peter and Manny taking separate actions. To mask their scent, they smeared themselves with the monster's viscous secretion before setting out. Once ready, the 2 men started their nerve-wracking mission. Manny was responsible for turning on the track switch, while Peter went to connect the severed wires. In a narrow passageway, Peter successfully found the broken wires, but just as he was pulling on them, a monster suddenly appeared beside him. However, it seemed not to notice Peter. Likely due to the secretion he had smeared on himself, Peter narrowly escaped death, quickly pulling out more viscera from his pocket and smearing it on himself again. After some maneuvering, Peter successfully connected the wires. Then he discovered that the fuses of the switch were also blown. With no other option, Peter used the metal frame of his eyeglasses as a makeshift fuse. Finally, he pulled down the switch and turned on the power. Now all that was needed was for Manny to turn on the track switch so the subway could start. But during his search for the switch, Manny unexpectedly found his missing son, Chewy. Despite Manny's calls, Chewy was unresponsive, seemingly in shock. Sweating profusely, Manny began to wipe his face with a cloth he carried, unaware that the secretion on his body was losing its effect. A monster had already approached behind Manny. Seeing that Manny was delaying and not taking action to open the switch, Leonard guessed something must have gone wrong. Thus, Susan had no choice but to smear the secretion on herself and prepare to take a risk to find out what happened. She only found Manny's dropped flashlight. Just then, Susan also saw Chewie hiding in the shadows. As they returned, they encountered Peter, but at the same time, several monsters also spotted them, blocking the essential path at the door. Seeing this, Leonard decisively stepped off the subway. Knowing his wounds were too severe to escape, he deliberately made noise to draw the monster's attention, buying time for the others to escape. Leonard's sacrifice allowed them to escape, and they found a hanging basket that could take them out. But at this moment, Chewie suddenly burst into loud crying. As expected, a second later, a monster descended from above. This creature was a wingless male Judas breed, lacking the ability to fly but more ferocious. At this critical moment, Peter didn't think of his safety and quickly closed the gate, pulling the rope to lift them up. Before the monster could catch up, Peter quickly crawled into a cramped passage, desperately crawling forward. He closed the iron gates behind him, and it wasn't until he shut the last steel door that he barely managed to block the pursuing monster. But just as Peter breathed a sigh of relief, he found the ground covered in sticky slime, turning around only to realize he was in the monster's lair. The ceiling was densely hung with countless monsters, a sight so unnerving it made one's skin crawl. Meanwhile, the monsters outside began to ram the door. In a panic, Peter saw leaking gas and slowly took out a lighter, devising a plan to eliminate all the monsters. He then picked up a fire axe and frantically smashed at the pipes. Once gas filled the entire chamber, he was ready to ignite it with his lighter, determined to die with the monsters. But the lighter wouldn't spark. The next second, a monster broke through the door and knocked Peter down, his lighter falling to the ground. As the monsters from above began to awaken and surround him, Peter tried again but accidentally dropped the lighter into water. As more monsters closed in, Peter grabbed the fire axe and furiously smashed the ground mesh. The violent explosions swept through the underground tunnel, causing panic among the people above. When Susan got up, she was horrified to see that the male monster had not died and was eyeing Chewie not far away. In desperation, Susan cut her palm to use the scent of blood to attract the monster. Just then, the rumble of an approaching train sounded. Susan quickly devised a plan to kill the monster. The creature was crushed into pieces by the train. Susan and Chewie made it back to the surface and were rescued. The police and firefighters quickly secured the scene, but Susan did not see Peter among them, and just as she feared he had died, she saw a familiar figure slowly walking out of the subway station. It turned out that just before the explosion, Peter had jumped into the water in time to save his life. The couple had once again thwarted a disaster that could have destroyed the city.